Well, this is Up. I'm David Gura, and if you're on Twitter this morning, you may have seen the hashtag 1619 Project Brunch. The New York Times Magazine is rolling out a special issue commemorating the 400-year anniversary of the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in what would become the United States. That happened in 1619, and the Times' 1619 Project is a cultural history of how the legacy of slavery continues to shape and define life in America. There are stories and essays from journalists and poets and museum curators. It is an examination of the United States' origin story, a corrective history. It is designed to kickstart conversations, thus that hashtag I just mentioned, 1619 Project Brunch. And I'm pleased that we're going to have our own brunch this morning with the creator of this project, Nikole Hannah-Jones, whose essay is at the front of the issue, America Wasn't a Democracy Until Black Americans Made It One. Thank you very much for being here. And it is an astonishing thing to behold. I encourage everybody to get the physical copy. Help us understand the genesis of this, how long you've been thinking about this, how long you've been thinking about changing our notions of the start of this country, moving it from 1776 to 1619.
So I first came across the date 1619 as a high school student. And I came across it in a book called Before the Mayflower. And I just remembered as a student being astounded because I had never been taught that enslaved people, that people of African descent had been here even before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. So I've been obsessed with that period for a long time. And as the anniversary was approaching, I really thought that this was an opportunity to finally examine in an institution like the Times the legacy of what it means to be a country that was founded in slavery and where, you know, this is the 400th anniversary of that institution. Walk
us through what it was like to evangelize for this. You have some great people in this magazine. Our colleague Tremaine Lee, Rita Dove is in there, Wesley Morris. Talk about that conversation, you bringing up this date and getting folks to think about it in the way that you've been thinking about it.
You know, it was amazing. People, I mean, when I first pitched it at the New York Times, there was no pushback whatsoever. People immediately, Jake Silverstein, my editor, Lena, immediately saw that this was something important that we should do, that how often do you get a chance to commemorate 400 years of anything, but especially an institution that has been so central to America, but that we have refused to really grapple with. So when I started talking to other writers and poets and asking them, people were just so excited to participate, to be able to weigh in a historic way in the paper of record on this institution and its legacy. I didn't have a problem convincing people.
I'm going to ask you a bit about your essay, then we'll bring everybody else in the conversation as well. You write about the flag that flew outside your house and your dad's regard for that. What he recognized in that flag that you were unable to recognize, at least initially. Talk a bit about that, how through thinking about this, through this project, you have come to an understanding or changed your understanding of what that flag meant, what the symbolism meant to your dad.
Absolutely. So I had, as a child, particularly during my teenage years, a very ambivalent feeling about being an American. I grew up with the sense that this wasn't really our country to claim and that we had never been treated as full citizens. So my dad flying this flag in our yard, and I talk about it in the piece, I mean, our house was kind of perpetually in disrepair, but that flag was always pristine. And as soon as it got any tatter, my dad would take it down. And I was really embarrassed as a child that he would so outwardly show patriotism for a country that I felt didn't treat black people as citizens. But through the years, and really in working on this project, I just came to understand that our history in this country, black people's role as truly believing in our founding ideals and being willing to die again and again to make those founding ideals true for all Americans. There's no greater patriotism. And it's actually disrespectful to our ancestors not to claim this country and that flag and to be able to claim our legacy here on these lands.
It exists beautifully in print, beautifully online as well. Mike, I know you've been looking at it. I see your dog-eared copy there as well.
Well, I would say our house has been perpetually in disrepair too, right? So I got this last night and I was highlighting it. I think this is a really profound part. And you wrote this. The shameful paradox of continuing chattel slavery in a nation founded on individual freedom, scholars today assert, led to a hardening of the racial caste system. The paradox, not just the fact of the peculiar institution, not just the fact that black Americans were stamped from the beginning as a problem, but the paradox of the ideals and the reality drove us crazy. Is this your point?
Yes, it had a corrosive effect because we knew that at our founding was a hypocrisy. It's one of the things I hear all the time is, well, lots of nations practice slavery, but those nations were not founded on the idea of individual rights and that we would be the most liberatory democracy that the world has ever seen. So having to deal with those two things, that you are holding people in perpetual bondage while claiming to be a country built on individual rights, was extremely corrosive to our development. And that's really what the magazine tries to grapple with, is that you can look across modern society today and still see the effects of that need to hide that sin. We want to hide that sin because we're ashamed of it.
There's so much resonance today to what has happened over these last many years. I'll read another quotation from your essay. No one cherishes freedom more than those who have not had it, and to this day, black Americans more than any other group embrace the democratic ideals of a common good. And Danielle, I'll turn to you on that point. So situating this in this election, situating the conversation we were having a little bit earlier about housing policy in this country, that is particularly resonant.
Yeah, the piece was it's so incredible, and the project is absolutely astounding because, like you, I didn't learn any of this, right? I never learned any of this in school. Anything that I was taught about African Americans, about slavery, was always just like a bookmark, right? It was never a story to be told, and it is one that we consistently hide from. And not only do we hide from it, we pretend it does not exist. We pretend, as when Mitch McConnell was asked about reparations, it's like, but we gave you a black president, so you should be okay with that, right? And it's this idea that we should just be satisfied, that as black people, we should just be satisfied that we're able to walk around as fully fledged human beings, even though we're not allowed to be those people. We're not allowed to embody freedom, embody liberty, and to question this government. We are people that have persistently been oppressed and depressed by the American democratic system, and yet we're never allowed to question it. And anytime that we do, you have the Trumps of the world that tell us that we're not patriotic, that we have no reason to kneel, that we have no reason to shout, when if anyone has a reason to shout, it is black people, right? Because we go from slavery, we move into Jim Crow, we have this moment of Reconstruction, which I can look at as the Obama years was that little moment of neo-Reconstructionism, and then you have the oppression that follows suit. You have the white anger and the white rage that follows suit. How dare these black people, see themselves as fully functioning people that are allowed to claim power? To me, this is the history that we should have been taught from the beginning. This project is what we should have been founded on. And when slavery was taken away, we should have looked to this history, and we wouldn't be in the place that we are now if we had actually reconciled with it.
Nicole, last question here. This is a living history, and I mentioned it exists online, it's in print. It's going to be on the Daily. You're doing a ton of stuff to get this out to teachers, get this to classrooms across the country. Speak to that. I mean, you could have written a book, you could have edited a book. This could have existed in another form. Why was that so important to you, that it exists on all of these platforms, that be this kind of novel piece of history?
I think what was critical to us is that this effort is really trying to reframe the way that we think about slavery, the way that we think about our country, and the way we think about black Americans who have, from the beginning, been posed as a problem. And my argument is that we are not. We, in fact, have been a solution over and over again, but have not been recognized in that way. And so it can't just be a history that lives in a book that a historian might read. It has to be a living history. It has to be a history that gets out to the masses, which is why we've partnered with the Pulitzer Center to design an entire curriculum that's free for teachers to download. It's why we got sponsorship to print more than 200,000 copies that we are giving out for free to ensure that it's not just paid subscribers who can access this information. It means a lot that the institution of the New York Times, which is where we know 50 years from now, 100 years ago now, when historians want to see what was happening at this time, this is where they will go. And to do this type of effort in this magazine and in this newspaper, I think can be transformative.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.